Welcome to our webinar today. The topic we will be discussing is overcoming stigma in Africa, a nursing perspective. My name is Sandra Dewar. I'm a specialized epilepsy nurse clinician and researcher and the treasurer of the ILAE nursing section. And it's a pleasure to invite you thank you for joining the webinar today. I would also just like to point out at the very end, there is a survey which we would be pleased if you would complete. Addressing stigma has been identified as one of the strategic goals of the ILAE for international activities until 2030. And although we focus on the African region today, addressing stigma is a global priority that involves working in partnerships with relevant stakeholders in the domains of treatment access, education and employment, and ensuring equal opportunities for people affected by epilepsy. The talks today will draw attention to the very challenging topic of stigma in Africa, with a specific focus on nursing interventions appropriate for individuals, the community, and relevant organizations. We will hear from speakers representing 3 African regions. The talks will be followed by an opportunity for questions, comments, and discussion. I will briefly introduce each of our speakers. Action Amos is a person with epilepsy. He is currently the Vice President of the IBE, the International Bureau for Epilepsy. Action obtained a Master of Science in Mental Health from the University of Edinburgh and holds a research fellowship at that university. Action has a great deal of experience in the area of human rights and policy analysis. Since he spends most of his time in Malawi, he will speak on the impact of stigma in Malawi. Our second and third speakers will present on nursing initiatives to reduce stigma. Monicah Murrey is a registered nurse and very experienced nurse based in Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, which is the second largest tertiary hospital in Kenya. She is also the regional lead of the ILAE nursing section for Africa. Peter Kabemba is both a registered nurse and an EEG technician at the University Teaching Hospital for Children in Zambia, where he works in a developmental intervention clinic. His greatest concerns for people with epilepsy include common mismanagement of seizures, the difficulty of obtaining anti-seizure medicines in Africa, and the enormous negative impact of stigma that has to be overcome in order for people to live fulfilled lives. So at this point, we will segue to the talks, and the 3 talks will flow one after the other. And as I said earlier, we will then open the floor for some discussion. So enjoy the talks.
Good day, everyone. My name's Action Amos. I'm a person with epilepsy. I'm based in Malawi, and currently I'm the Vice President of the International Bureau of Epilepsy. I'm glad to be here and also to talk about epilepsy stigma with the perspective from a user's perspective, as well as to share with you lessons that we've learned from within Africa across the 28 countries where we work as International Bureau of Epilepsy. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk mainly about first, the Intersectional Global Action Plan on disorders and highlight the objectives that talk about epilepsy. I'll also talk to you about the stigma cycle, then the stigma intersectionality, types of stigma, consequences of stigma, then also lessons that have been learned. As you know, stigma does not only affect persons with epilepsy alone, it affects different conditions across the health spectrum. So I'll share with you some lessons from the mental health movement, and lastly talk to you about what can, as you know, in May 2022, the World Health Organization, through its assembly, passed a resolution, the Intersectional Global Action Plan on epilepsy and other neurological disorders. Among some of its goals, vision, and guiding principles and strategic objectives, one thing that has been emphasized by this Global Action Plan is to reduce stigma. In its vision, if you see on the slides that we have here, you will note that people affected with neurological disorders and their carers, they need to attain the highest possible level of health with equal rights, opportunities, respect, and autonomy, of which this goes against the issue to do with stigma, or those that are affected by stigma. So this vision wants to address the issue to do with stigma, discrimination, and other challenges. And if you look at the goals, one of the goals for this IGAP is to reduce stigma. So that's another goal that the IGAP is focusing on. Then you look at the guiding principles, you'll see they're person-centered, or they focus on the person with a neurological disorder or epilepsy. Then if you look at all the strategic objectives, you will see they're all talking about improving all aspects or a holistic approach of improving the well-being of a person with epilepsy. So we have an instrument currently that is trying to drive this agenda of stigma. And you will see in those highlighted areas the issues I've been talking about across all these talked when we were looking at the stigma cycle there. So all this shows the intersectionality. When one thing happens, the other thing will also follow suit and happen. But in between, there is that intersectionality of being stigmatized. And we see more of this, you know, in Africa, especially where people are quite ignorant, in rural communities where awareness is quite low. But now we've just set the scene to talk about, you know, the cycle, the intersectionality. But what are the types of stigma that are there? So you'll see on the left side there, the types of stigma that are there. First is the self-stigma, right? There is a stigma by association. You know, who do we associate with? So some do not want to associate with us, they disassociate with us. The self-stigma is that the self-induced stigma. So when I say that, well, I'm not wanted, I'm devalued, then I look down upon myself. Or there is that fear that is generated in me that I'm self-unworthy. You know, I value myself not, you know, as a normal person, as they say in quotations, then I stigmatize my own self. By association, those that we associate with, it could be at school, at work, in the community, at church, wherever people are stigmatized. Public stigma, you know, talk about public stigma, that's the whole community. If it could be through culture, through beliefs and other things, people get stigmatized. And you can see there, this is one of the most dangerous when a community gets together and have this kind of they are hoodwinked to think about a certain condition. So there is misinformation, there's prejudice, and there is discrimination. Then there is structural discrimination. I want to share with you an example of structural discrimination, and this usually happens in hospitals. So you go to a hospital, you're a woman with epilepsy, you're pregnant. So you get there and the nurses, they know you're a patient. And then you tell them, I'm pregnant, or you get the test, you're pregnant. One thing that they usually ask is, you, with your condition, how did you get this? Right? How would you feel? You're pregnant, you're a woman with epilepsy, and you're being asked that question. Is it that if I have epilepsy, I cannot conceive, or I cannot be, involved in sexual reproduction process? So all this is structural, and I'm saying this because we have seen, heard about this, and I've personally witnessed such discrimination within the community where I live, where women are discriminated based on their condition. And when you look at this, you also get to know that self-stigma, as I've already mentioned, is internalized. Stigma by association, we can call it affiliate or cortex stigma. And structural discrimination can be systematic discrimination or organizational stigma. There are even laws. For example, in Tanzania, we have a law, the Constitution of Tanzania says a person can be divorced if they happen to be having epilepsy. And it says a woman with epilepsy can be divorced. So you see, this is institutionalized structural discrimination, another type of stigma that we currently are facing in Africa. So what are the consequences of stigma? Well, they're quite. There's loss of relationships, and you can even relate. We go back to that cycle where we're talking about. You can relate each node of that cycle, whether it was division or separation, negative attitude, labeling. Or as each of them happens, there is a consequence. For example, loss of relationships, loneliness, shame, feeling discouraged, fear of getting help. People do not come out of the shadows. They know there is help, but they decide not to do it. There is a loss of jobs or home once you are known to have the condition, isolation. All these are consequences. And this consequence cycle runs throughout the whole life journey of a person with epilepsy. You go through this cycle when you're at school, you go through this cycle when you're in the community, you go through this when others you're meant to receive any other benefits. Maybe there could be, social cash transfer or social benefits within a community, development benefits that you're supposed to get. You go through this cycle. You don't go through this cycle once, or the consequences that come through are not just once. As you go through the cycle repetitively, you are also affected consequently. So it is a life-long process that affects persons with epilepsy. You're looking for work, you want to marry, once you're labeled, once you're stereotyped, you're discriminated, all that affects you. Well, that we can learn from the mental health movement. And one thing that they have emphasized, which I can call the key principle within the mental health movement, is to mind the language. The language that we use, it needs to be a language that focuses on the person and not on the condition. We need also to avoid derogatory words. So in our vernacular languages, we have different ways of demeaning people, especially when they have a condition just as epilepsy. And this cuts across, even when we talk about people with HIV/AIDS, people with mental health disabilities or psychosocial disabilities, and applies also to persons with epilepsy. So it is quite important that the language, we need to mind the language. You can be a nurse, you can be a doctor, you can be a father, you can be a mother, you can be a caregiver, you can be a pastor at church or anywhere else. One area that we need to mind is the language, and language is quite important. We need to use inclusive language, and by doing so we can actually break barriers. And as you know, we're talking from without, what can then be done? We've just talked about structural barriers that can be there, issues to do with you know, culture, institutional practices, not having resources for the population, discriminatory policies, just as the example that I cited of in Ethiopia, in Tanzania, where there's a discriminatory law, and well, quite a number of issues that can affect persons with epilepsy. So what is it that can be done? Well, there's quite a lot that we need to look at. For each barrier, there should be a mitigating intervention that should be done. So we can talk about cultural norms that influence meanings, practices, and outcomes as key, especially when we look at in Africa. That is quite key. What we believe in affects the outcome of how we look at a person. Having said that, there are quite a number of resources, and one good resource that I found to be useful that was developed by International Bureau of Epilepsy, which focuses not only on advocates, persons with epilepsy themselves, their carers, their givers, or any other key stakeholders in stigma reduction, is the Stigma toolkit that was developed. And this Stigma toolkit, I can tell you, it was developed by persons with epilepsy themselves, talking about you know, their aspirations, what they want to see to be done and how it can be done. And this is based on their lived experience. So I would urge everyone present today to have an access to it. I can share this within the link that is there, and people can access it and read on what they can do, either professionally or as a person taking care of someone with epilepsy, or as a person with epilepsy. And what we have discussed here cuts across all neurological disorders. I want to thank you for your attention. Other areas.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation on nursing initiatives to reduce stigma. So epilepsy in Africa. Epilepsy is a major public health problem in developing countries. About 80% of people with epilepsy live in low and middle income countries. These are countries that have low economies or are developing countries. Approximately 25 million people in Africa have epilepsy. What are some of the epilepsy-related stigma that we have in Africa? People with epilepsy and their families suffer from stigma and discrimination. Most times, these people that live with epilepsy are discriminated or stigmatized. About 75 in 100 are stigmatized and excluded from education, training, employment, and social life. So these 75 out of 100 sometimes are not put into school, they are left out of education, sometimes they're not employed, and they have a very poor social life because of their condition, which is epilepsy. So in definition, what is a stigma? So a stigma is a set of negative and often unfair beliefs that a society or group of people have about something that you look at and you have unfair beliefs, probably negative thoughts about. So this is what we term as stigma. And some of the consequences that these people with epilepsy live with is family and social isolation, where they're isolated from their family. Their family will tie them in their homes. Sometimes they'll not go to school because of their condition. They'll be isolated from the society. They'll not be allowed to play with their friends. They have self-esteem is quite very low because of their condition. They will not have a very high esteem. Psychological well-being is not 100%. The quality of life as well is poor because of their condition. Some of these patients with epilepsy will not be taken care of. They will not bath them. They will not wash their clothes because of the condition that they have. What are some of the related stigma in Africa that we have? So some of these are cultural beliefs and superstition, lack of awareness and understandings. These are just some of the related stigma in Africa, that's cultural beliefs, superstition, and lack of awareness. There are actually even more. So what are some of the causes and nature of epilepsy? People feel it's destined. You are destined to having epilepsy. Could be caused by witchcraft, where someone is bewitched and has now epilepsy, or a curse. Someone is cursed, that's why they have seizures and they have epilepsy. Or you have demonic possession, or you have an evil spirit in you. Sometimes people feel it's psychiatric disorder, or can be transmitted through saliva. You know, when patients with epilepsy have an episode, they fall to the ground, they're jerking, and they have this foam coming out of their mouth. People think or feel this saliva can actually contain epilepsy, and if they cut them, most likely can get epilepsy. So blood disease, which they feel people with epilepsy have a weak blood. Some of the treatment that are in Africa that are used to treat epilepsy, it should be treated by a traditional healer. So most people believe traditional healers are the best people to treat epilepsy. So they trust them and they believe in them, and they feel if someone has epilepsy, should be taken to a traditional healer for treatment. Someone should wear an amulet. So some people feel it's not treatable. So nurses are actually not even approachable. So they feel they can't even go to nurses because they have these traditional healers that they feel are actually better. And sometimes they feel nurses themselves cannot be approached concerning this condition. So what are some of the first aid, or some of the things that we do, or what are done in Africa as first aid for seizures? Is we have to sacrifice to the God. So if you have a family member, you have a friend, you have a relative that suffers from epilepsy, you have to sacrifice to the gods, where you give an offering to the gods. Could be a white chicken, a goat, or anything, because of the person that you have with epilepsy. The compliance with cultural tattoos. So sometimes these people with epilepsy are actually given tattoos, where they're taken to traditional healers and they put tattoos on their bodies to feel that they are being treated as first aid. So these tattoos, immediately the person falls to the ground, they feel it's the right time to actually give them tattoos as first aid. So you also need to smell the smoke of a struck match, pour water on the face of the person, or sprinkle olive oil. So in this case, you have a patient falls to the ground and they're having a seizure. Instead of helping them, actually pour water on them, or you sprinkle olive oil on their face, especially here in Africa, where they have to sprinkle on their face as first aid. Then place a spoon between the teeth. Person goes to the ground, and because they're jerking and they're foamed, put a spoon between the teeth. Or give a sweet during a seizure, where they feel, no, actually when someone goes to the ground, it's because probably they haven't eaten or something, so you have to put a sweet so that they can lick it while they're having a seizure. Some of the misconception and examples that we have is that epilepsy is contagious. For example, a pastor is called to pray over the student at a school. They need to pray for the whole school because the spirit may jump to the next person. So if this is a misconception that we have, someone has a seizure, they call a pastor to pray for them, and the pastor has to pray for the entire school, because if they don't pray, this spirit may jump to the next student. So one person recently died, actually, fell on her face, and the people who were watching did not do anything because they were afraid of being demon possessed by catching it. They watched this person die. They didn't do anything about it because they felt if they touch this person, they're actually going to catch epilepsy. So they let this person actually suffocate, actually choke, and actually die from a seizure. Another misconception is you put something in person's mouth during a seizure. So when someone is having a seizure, you have to put something in their mouth. For example, I woke up at a school and found myself having injuries from pens and rulers in my mouth. People thought they were helping me, but they were hurting me. So this is a pupil at school who woke up with mouth injuries because people had put pens and rulers in their mouth, thinking they were helping, and yet they were actually hurting the person. Another misconception is chicken wings, eggs, and okra will provoke seizures. For example, someone stopped eating chicken wings because their flapping causes seizures, as chicken will flap and then they feel those actually cause seizures. Eggs, people stop eating eggs because they make them confused. They feel if you eat an egg, you actually be confused. And okra, the foam that comes out of your mouth when you have a seizure. So this is an example where people will stop eating okra and feel, because the way we prepare okra here in Africa, you know, where we boil it, as we are cooking it, it has this foam that is actually building in the pot, and they feel because of that foam, and you eat this okra, you actually only have a seizure, actually produce a lot of actually foam on the mouth. At this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Monica from Kenya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to talk about the effect of stigma in Africa. As you can see on our slide, there were four countries in sub-Saharan Africa which was done a study, and that is South Africa with 331 participants, Tanzania with 460 participants, Uganda with 241 participants, Kenya at 766 participants, and Ghana at 372 participants. A total of 2,171 were involved in this study, and we realized that now a number of people was done. Non-attendance to school were at 938, which is a bigger number, which shows that most people who have epilepsy don't go to school, or either they go to school but they don't complete the schooling. Around 646 on the total were unemployed adults, and others were unmarried. This shows that the most people who are affected is with the stigma is that most remain, are not able to attend to school. Some remain unemployed because every time you want to go for unemployment, somebody would say, no, if you're epileptic, I'm not going to employ you because in case you get a seizure on the process of employment, nobody's going to handle you. Or if you die in the process of those conversions, I'll be sued. So people fear employing people with epilepsy. People also fear getting married to a person who has epilepsy. Reason being that they feel like they're going to be a burden. Because of course, people, if you get a seizure in the process of where maybe you're making a meal for your family, and then you fall into a fire, definitely you'll be costing, they'll feel like you're a burden to them. So that is the effect on stigma in Africa. So what are these initiatives that we have for us? We have the initiative, I'll be talking about a few stigma reduction interventions in Africa. I'll start with in Kenya. In Kenya, we have, as you can see, in Kenya, there's is a country that there are laws and policies in this, which in the schools, and the best place to pass information is in schools. So there was this school project which was done where children were trained on what can cause epilepsy, how are the symptoms, what are the management, that is the first aid management, because where we really have these cases of stigma is in school. You'll find that people with the stigma are always being told don't come to school, or they're taken into a special school, or they're totally sent home. And that is where we really needed to diminish this stigma. So by training the students, the pupils, on what really stigma is, what the causes are, and how to manage it was the best option for us. So there were about 15 schools which were conducted in Nairobi, and a total of 7,248 people were trained on the same. Another thing which was done in this school project also, the nurses and the people in the school, the employees in the school were also taught, because the moment we empower those people, it will at least reduce the stigma and know how to manage the epilepsy in school. So there were nurses which were trained, the school nurses were trained, and the personnel, the school personnel were also trained. By doing this also, it really helps us to pass that information to the parents at home and the community. Once the parent knows, it will pass to another parent, and also the community, definitely. Because if you are involving if you are doing the school project, it means once the information has into a child will pass to the father or the mother will pass to the rest of the people in the community, which really reduces the stigma relation in terms of patients with epilepsy. In Sierra Leone, there were a study which was done where they conducted there were 50 traditional healers which were conducted, and they were asked to explain what they do in managing epilepsy, and they were encouraged to handle the epilepsy as not being a contagious disease or something else, but to know that epilepsy is a disease which can be cured, and they were told on first aid. And they were also encouraged that every time they feel like they're not able to manage these cases, they send them to the health workers, which was a good way of trying to reduce stigma. In Zambia and Malawi and Lesotho, we have also this school pathway projects where the students are being encouraged, are being taught on what really causes epilepsy, what is the first aid, and how do you manage it, which really helps us across introduction of this stigma in Africa. There's also a development of benches, what is called stigma benches. This is where people living with epilepsy meet once or twice, and they talk on the issues that really affect them in terms of epilepsy. They talk of what difficulties they have, and they try to get a solution for them to reduce this stigma. You also have the clinical education program. The clinical education program, this is where it was used to try to address misconception, to improve treatment adherence to anesthesia medication. And what really happened was that education was done to people with epilepsy. Epilepsy were empowered on what to do, why they need to comply with the medication, because the moment they comply with the medication, it is going to reduce the anesthesia's episodes. And also the caregivers, the people living with them, they were empowered also on, in case a patient has epilepsy, has these episodes of convulsion, how do you manage it? How will you make this patient rest? And the importance of immediately sending the person to the hospital after the conversion, because definitely there must have been something to trigger the conversions. It can be able to due to sepsis or something else, or lack of the medication. So it's good to refer them to the hospital immediately after the episode of conversion. There was also a one-day workshop which was done, and 14 healthcare providers, that is the nurses and the clinical officers, were involved, and they were taught on improvement of adherence to anesthesia medication, what to do to reduce this seizure frequency. As we say, the moment you comply with medication, automatically it's going to reduce the seizure episodes, and also to improve the epilepsy belief and attitude. We realized on the study which was done about the epilepsy, we realized that people who also contributed to the stigma are the health workers, that is the nurse and the clinical officer. Because if you're not competent enough to handle a case, the next thing you'll do is to refer. And not we always refer, people always refer they refer them back to the community again. That's the traditional healers. And that's where we really get, since you don't have that ability, instead of seeking opinion from other people, you refer back. Which with this training, it really improved. It was to improve the attitude and the attitude score on management of epilepsy. There was a comic book. This is in Ethiopia, where we believe the influence of the nature of treatment is really important in care of these patients with epilepsy. So there was a comic book where it was they tried to explain to the children what really causes epilepsy, how they can manage it, the first aid, which is a very good idea of passing information. Because every time, all children like comic books. So the moment they see a cartoon in a comic book and they want to read more and see, the moment they get those information, they will take, of course, the community. They pass their parents, and the parents will pass to the rest of us in the community. So this comic book really help to pass this information, because all school-age children in Ethiopia are able to read this book and pass the information, which really helps us to reduce stigma. So our next topic we are talking about is what's our role as nurses in management of epilepsy. So we have awareness program. A main barrier is, these are main barriers in addressing stigma in Africa and misconception surrounding the disease. So raising awareness is the key. It's the key thing about public participation, where you protest, you give information to the public on really what is this epilepsy, how do you manage it, why do you need to do adherence of medication, what really makes you improve this care of this patient, what's the first aid of these patients who have epilepsy. So awareness program is really one of the things that nurses team are really participating. And once the community is aware of really what happens with epilepsy, it really helps us to reduce the stigma stage of it. Another thing was the establishment of support group. This support group are people with epilepsy, which is very resourceful to them. Once we have this support group, the nursing team has really cooperated with the people with epilepsy to have this support group so that they're able to give the information to them, try to support them out, to try to silence the putting of the stigma. The moment patients who have epilepsy speak out their issues in the support group, they're told, they're encouraged, they're given a positive attitude, which they improve on the management. They're also given the importance of what they need to comply with this medication. Because the moment you comply with the medication, automatically it means that you're going to come out with, you're going to have these episodes of anti-seizure. There's also working with the community-based programs. This community-based program, the nurses provide accurate information to the community of what really epilepsy is, how they can manage it, what the nurses think the community can help in the reduction of this, the reduction of this stigma. So the nurses' main thing is to try to reduce the myths, the misconception about epilepsy. So by them giving the right information to the community, it really helps a lot. Like in Africa, in Kenya, we have the barasas. This is where the villagers and the leaders, the village leaders are always coming in. So when the moment you go talk to them about what you think we should do as in terms of what the epilepsy is, what you can do to reduce the stigma, it really, the information will be passed and to really reduce the cases of epilepsy. There's this support, identification, and referral system used by the community health workers and volunteers. The nursing team has really empowered the people in the community. That is with information of how they can handle a patient with epilepsy, when they can refer a patient for epilepsy, but really supporting them with information and also medication. The moment the nursing team give the information to them, the community health workers there, they have power to manage these cases and refer them whenever possible. They also have volunteers, people who can volunteer to bring the patients to the hospital. So before, in the process of those volunteers, they're being taught, they're being encouraged, they're given facts on how they can handle in case of episode of conversion and how to reduce it also. The nurses have really played a vital role in healthcare to deliver a unique perspective on patient needs. That is empowering the patients with the information. That is being the advocate of the patients. We have a support advocacy work on shortage of anti-seizure medication. Normally, in most of our health centers, the people who run the health centers are the nurses, and they're the ones who, they're the doctors, the nurse is still the pharmacist. So they are the ones who will always advocate for medications to be brought into the village for people to get it. Because most of the reason why we have stigma is because there's lack of anti-seizure medications in the village. So they normally prefer to go to the traditional healers where they will get medication freely. So the nurses really played advocacy cases, making sure that medications are there. They are fully there. There's also, they can, whenever they have issues with medication, they write, they rate, they give feedback to the government that we need this and this drugs to help these patients. Because the moment the nurse plays the advocacy part and writes to the government that we need 1 or 2 or 3 drugs to prevent seizure, they will automatically get the drugs. And once they get the drugs, it means the people with epilepsy will not have issues with the drugs. There's also partnership with the rest of the organization. So this partnership with the NGOs, this is non-governmental organization, to try to reduce stigma to really improve the reduction of stigma, because those non-governmental really helps in awareness program. They help also with the education program. They help in training, which with the build-up of nurse advocates really improve the stigma in reduction in Africa. So the nursing team has really played all that part. In short, what I've said is that nurses have tried to engage in awareness program. They've supported establishment of epilepsy support groups. They've worked with community-based programs. They've helped in support identification and referral system used by community health workers and volunteers. They've really supported on advocacy work and schedule of anti-seizure medication. And they have also helped in building up of advocacy with other organizations, in particular to try to reduce stigma. On our last slide, we talk of the reference. These are references for this talk. In case you want to get more information about what nursing team has done and how we have tried to reduce stigma, you can click on it and you get all the information you need. Thank you so much. It's time for question and answers.
Thank you for those excellent talks, and very thought-provoking. I think, one of the greatest challenges we have is that despite many advances in treatment of epilepsy, both on the diagnostic front and on the treatment front, our greatest challenge still is one of societal limitations, especially cultural beliefs, as we heard throughout the talks this morning. I think the one thing that stood out for me is the importance of developing partnerships, and that this is probably the key to our educational efforts and certainly to influencing governments. And these are problems which we have obviously highlighted in the African region, but these are actually challenges all around the world. So we have much to learn from each other in terms of how to address this. And let's just see if there are any questions in the chat. I think Patty has a comment or a question. Patty?
Thanks, Sandy. This is a question, it's a two-part question, one from Karen and the other from me. So it's probably to Action and to Monicah, but anyone can answer. The first is there programs about educating the traditional healers in the community that can be replicated in other regions? So that's number one. And number two, is there a difference in how nurses or doctors are perceived and that willingness to work with them in different areas?
Very good questions. Amos, would you like to take Action? Would you like to take that question?
Yeah, no, thank you, Karen, for that questions. Quite some thought-provoking questions. So when it comes to traditional healers, as IBE, together with our chapter in Sierra Leone, we got funding to support their work in Sierra Leone, where they had engagement with traditional healers. And I would say it was quite a successful project that they did run for 12 months. What they started doing was having awareness campaigns with the traditional healers. They also had what I would call closed door trainings with the Traditional Healers Association in Sierra Leone. And the impact that now we are realizing from Sierra Leone is that the Traditional Healers Association and the Traditional Healers in Sierra Leone are actually now having a formalized referral system where they receive patients, but also refer them to what I would call conventional support in the hospital. So in one example that I can cite, one traditional healer attended a person with epilepsy, gave him his own concoctions. And after that, he told that, well, I've done the part that I've done, it's almost 80% for you to heal. However, you need to go to the hospital to finish the rest of the treatment. And with that, you are going, and you know, that was actually captured in the documentations that were reported to us by this. So this is just an example of one intervention that has worked, but it's quite important, you know, to have collaborations and working with these traditional healers. You know, it's difficult to change culture and perceptions, especially when they are based on culture. So it's quite a challenge, but to change behaviors, it's much more easier. And we must also note that these traditional healers, they earn a living through the work that they do. So for them to easily accept any other perceived intervention without them involved, it's going to be a big order for us to do. So what's important is to work with them. And, you know, these are the people that promote the stigmatization through culture and beliefs. So working with them will actually help us to destigmatize epilepsy.
Yes, you made a number of really important points there, Action. And I think, you know, these partnerships are extremely powerful. And you know, education of communities really lies at the root of solutions. But you know, cultural beliefs do run really deep, and so it really takes you know, groups, partnerships between, you know, these traditional healers and you know, the hospital services to really come together. Which is an enormous challenge, I think, for groups like the International Bureau Against Epilepsy, and obviously for all the work that you are all doing in Africa. There's another question.
Sorry, Sandy, maybe just also. Sorry, just to share another example again of another current project that we are running in Kenya through an organization called Shine Epilepsy, and in South Sudan, as well as in Rwanda. So they've established what we are calling stigma benches. This is a concept that we borrowed from the friendship bench, which is a mental health bench. And in these stigma benches, they are inviting gatekeepers, including traditional healers, to listen to the stories that are being said by persons with epilepsy, you know, what they face. And then after that discussion that they have, then, you know, they suggest some possible interventions to eradicate stigma in their communities. And these are community stigma benches. And on the 20th of this month, actually, we'll be having a webinar where they are going to share some of the experiences that they have had since February, when they started that project. And we'll have even one traditional healer also speaking, a chief also speaking in that webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Action. Yes, it's clearly important to make contact with the most influential members of a community in order to even begin to deal with the challenge. But Jane asks an important question here, which we can address to Monicah and Peter. You know, is what tips do you have for nurses who may be needing to bridge bridge communication between traditional healers and community workers that may carry a lot of influence? and the church, for instance, church workers. What suggestions do you have specifically for nurses, given, you know, the enormous amount of time they're spending with patients?
Okay, so I'll speak on behalf of Zambia. Like most of these programs that I've seen that people have done relating to our awareness and other things, and how they actually get in touch with religious people like pastors, going to churches and other things. I think it could be one of the most important things. And one thing I know is nurses are also committed to such program where they go and meet churches, they speak about epilepsy, stigma, just epilepsy awareness, because most people that live in the community, like Monica stated in the talk, that most times they are stigmatized and sometimes they are not married and they don't know what to do, they don't know where to go to. It would be a very good idea if nurses would visit these institutions and talk to them about epilepsy and what we can do just to improve the livelihood of patients living with epilepsy. I think Monica can also add on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think currently, now that we know what really is happening with us in Africa, the best way to focus is trying to reduce stigma by, first, we need to empower our nurses to have knowledge on what really epilepsy is and what's the management, and what is the management of epilepsy. So currently with the Elaine nursing, we are planning to have online teaching on management of epilepsy, which is really going to help us to, once we are empowered to know what really epilepsy is, then you can now go and focus to the community. I think the fact that most of us work in rural areas, and most of us work within where we come from. So we really know what our cultures are, what our issues are, and we can really handle it on our grounds in terms of knowing that you know your culture. Definitely, you know who are the people who have a say in that community. If it is a chief or a elder, a village elder, or the church, well, we just go there, give them, talk to them, give them facts, and then we allow them to change. We don't expect change to be immediately, but once we influence the people who are the key holders of the community, then we are going to go through with the stigma.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Monica. Thank you for that. And just to build on what Peter and Monica were saying, there's an important comment from Moses Sakala about epilepsy medicines and the side effects of medicines, which you know, often a problem for patients. And he says here, you know, he's a journalist, nurses can support the education of stigmas, that they're not willing to deal with issues of shortages because of bureaucracy. It's one part of his comment. The second part is this issue of side effects from medicines, particularly the cognitive and sedating side effects of medicines. And I know, you know, we have upwards of 30 medicines now available for treating epilepsy, but a lot of these medicines are not available in Africa and in many other parts of the world, actually. And this includes emergency treatments, which can be administered in the community without the need of intravenous access, or even intramuscular approaches. So I think this is another area where, you know, perhaps we have to work with nurses in their advocacy role. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are for nurses. You know, what sort of education do nurses need in order to be able to advocate at that level? And is this even possible within your regions? You know, how do we get new medicines? And sometimes they're not even that new anymore. How do we increase the, you know, your medicine armor, so to speak? Any thoughts on that from our panel?
Sandra, maybe I can jump in. The issue we are talking about, it's mainly about stigma, but also I think the issue that has been highlighted of shortages of drugs. So where do the nurses come in? So if you look at it, there is a demand and supply side of things. So the demand side would come from the persons affected, in this case, persons with epilepsy themselves. And the supply side then will be the government, and that's where most nurses are. But across Africa, we have noted some best practices where nurses also jump onto the demand side. So instead of keeping quiet in the hospitals where there are no drugs, they also join in voicing out and highlighting the shortages of drugs in the specific centers where they are working. With that kind of collaboration, we have seen most governments actually waking up and starting to support that kind of those kind of demands when they come in, because you see here is the person or the advocate or both the person with the lived experience and the person who is supposed to be the carer, who is the nurse, joining hands. So that role of being a carer for nurses is quite important, but also they need also to be part of the advocates. I can tell you we're planning to have within the region campaigns next year if funding come across. So we anticipate that when this funding, these campaigns are being done, collaboration between nurses, it could be nurses associations, it could be neurological nurses, it could be epilepsy nurses, together with those with lived experience. They need to join hands in those campaigns. And our nurses in our communities, they have that respect, that they have that, even if they are seen to be part of that bandwagon, I think they will be respected, and the support as well as reducing stigma will be something that can be easily done. I just thought of sharing that thought.
Yeah, very, very nice thought. I think nurses are traditionally very respected in African communities. So I think to harness that energy opportunity is a very important one. I'm just wondering, Monicah, before we move topic, did you or Peter have anything else to add to this particular question of, access to medicines and nursing education in general?
Okay, we can say the problem with us, okay, currently we don't really have like a specialist in, we don't have nursing epilepsy specialist. We just, okay, what we do is general nursing, but we are, at least we have those knowledge that we are taught in school on management of patients with epilepsy. And also as you continue working, you learn more. So what we are saying, we're trying to say is that we'll soon be having an online, we'll be posting it on our wall of nursing. The few of us who are going to be there, you can, if you have, if you have some little money, you can join in and learn and get a certificate in epilepsy nursing, which is going to be a game hub for us. It can cost a little bit, but at least at the end of the day, it's going to be an online class for 6 weeks, which is going to give you more information, which is a good thing. So if any of us is able to have funds and joining, that would be good. Another thing I would like to say about medication, the goodness with most of our community hospitals, they are being run by the nurses, and there are people who are the patient advocate. So if there's a drug missing, they're the ones who tell the government that, okay, we're missing 1, 2, 3 drugs, and can you please avail to us, which really improves the perception on drug adherence. That's one thing I would like to say on this issue of medication. Thank you.
Thanks, Monicah. Anything else, Peter?
I think Action has highlighted so well, because there are two people there. There's the demand side and the supply side. So On the medication, I think also Monicah has mentioned, we are advocates. So we advocate and then we wait for the supply to supply. Thank you.
Mm. I think too, just to bring it back to the goals of the ILAE and this intersectoral action plan that we have before us for the next 7 or 8 years now, was the importance of having us all communicate together, the importance of these webinar sessions where people from around the world can easily join conversations. And especially, your involvement at the recent Congress in Dublin. I think these are opportunities for nurses to really learn about what's available and to learn from one another, how to communicate, because this is not a simple problem that we have. It's a problem of the brain, and epilepsy itself is a problem that affects so very many aspects of life. So it really takes us making connections at many levels in order to really understand our communities and then come up with strategies that are going to be workable and sustainable. And with that, I think there's one last question, which in the chat, which it relates to the support groups. And Margaret asks, do you involve relatives or spouses and children in the epilepsy support groups? So I'm just wondering if, Peter, Monicah, or Action, who how would you answer that?
Okay, maybe I can just from the support groups that we have across different countries. So these support groups will be groups which compose of persons with epilepsy themselves, their guardians or their carers, and in many instances you find that these support groups are either coordinated by a nurse, because most of them they are run on a health center, or maybe in a few instances we have gatekeepers. It could be a church leader, it could be a chief at his homestead. You have this, but the composition varies from place to place.
Terrific. We are almost at I think we're at the top of the hour. And I just want to see whether anybody has any last comment or questions. It doesn't have to have an answer because this is a very complicated topic. So any last words from anybody? Action.
Yeah, I just wanted to also refer to everyone. We have a documentary that's been finalized and almost ready for showcasing, and I would advise people to keep on the look for this documentary. You can find it. I think I've shared the link with Jane. I was not able to share the link to everyone. So it's the case of Stigma. And it was we had a trailer at the Congress, those that were there. So I would urge all to visit this website and just keep on the look for this documentary where we're able to showcase a stigma that is happening in families, stigma that's happening in the community, and also the issue of delayed support. But not only that, also showcasing that, when everything, the support is there, the change can be there, the stigmatization can actually go away, and even nurses can learn from that. And also to invite everyone, I think there was a discussion that maybe the nursing section of ILE might also want to join us in Ethiopia. We have an epilepsy conference happening in November 20 to 21. So we'll be also having a lot of programs that will be disseminated, and also a discussion together with WHO around IGAP implementation. So it will be good if we can have some representation as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Action. Well, I think we're almost coming to the end, so I would just draw your attention to inviting new members to join us. I think also just to compliment our speakers today for the enormous amount of work that went into preparing these very thought-provoking talks.